You are about to cross into a world where fear is real. Real stories, unexplained phenomena, where the supernatural lurks in the shadows. From the portal of dread. Today's story, the three female friends who discovered the hospital's darkest secret. I have been waiting for you. Welcome to my domain, the portal of dread. Here, each story is not merely a tale, but a portal I open directly to your worst nightmares. With me, fear is not just told, it is felt in the soul. Turn off the light. Lock the door. Let your own breath guide you through the inevitable labyrinth of madness. If you possess the foolish courage to cross this threshold, subscribe to the channel. And to prove your insolence, type in the comments, "I am not afraid." Now, prepare yourself, the unknown is already here. On the fringes of a forgotten road in Minas Gerais stands a hospital that ought not to exist anymore. The building seems to breathe even in ruins, as if each brick had been saturated with suffering and never dried. When the wind sweeps through the shattered windows, it doesn't sound like a natural gust, but rather like a human lament, prolonged and stifled. For decades, no one has been admitted there. Yet every night, residents swear they hear screams echoing from within, screams that belong to no living soul. The walls bear stains that refuse to vanish, dark marks resembling ancient blood, and it's said that neither rain nor time has managed to erase them. The most disturbing aspect, however, is what transpires on full moon dawns. Apparitions are seen gliding through corridors, red lights emanate from the empty windows, and chants in an unknown tongue reverberate through the air, as if rituals still took place within the abandoned operating theaters. Those who dare approach claim to feel something scratching their skin, even in the absence of physical contact. It's as if the hospital had chosen not to perish, as if every death that occurred there had transmuted into a voice that refuses to be silenced. And the entire town is compelled to listen. The hospital was erected in the 1940s in a small town in Minas Gerais, with the promise of ushering in modernity and hope for a region plagued by healthcare accessibility issues. It was an imposing edifice featuring tall windows, lengthy corridors, and an auditorium that hosted physicians from other cities for conferences. Initially, its presence was lauded as an advancement, a harbinger that lives would be saved there. Yet, over the years, the promise of healing transmuted into something far more sinister. Patients began to succumb in unsettling numbers, many during seemingly routine procedures, such as appendectomies or childbirths that theoretically posed no risks. Physicians reported sudden complications, inexplicable hemorrhages, and crises that seemed to materialize from thin air. Gradually, the hospital acquired the reputation of a cursed place, where those who entered rarely departed. By the 1970s, even more disquieting rumors began to surface. Nearby residents swore they heard noises during the pre-dawn hours, when there should have been no activity whatsoever. Footfalls echoing in the empty corridors, screams that sounded like women in labor, yet never materialized in patient records. Some claimed these sounds originated from the hospital's cellar, a space of restricted access, where only a handful of staff members were authorized to enter. The earliest rumors suggested that doctors and nurses clandestinely conducted experiments on patients deemed beyond hope of survival, as if striving to prolong life at any cost. However, not all returned from the experimental chambers. Documents that defied the ravages of time, yellowed pages preserved in municipal archives, reveal that between 1972 and 1975, at least 11 patients vanished without explanation. Officially, records indicated some were transferred to other institutions, yet no family could confirm their destination, nor did they find proof of such transfers. For the townspeople, there was no doubt. Those individuals had become unwitting subjects of macabre practices within the hospital's walls. As the years progressed, the atmosphere surrounding the building grew even heavier. Nurses resigned after just a few months of employment, citing persistent nightmares, insomnia, and a pervasive feeling of being watched even when alone. Renowned physicians declined invitations to practice there, claiming the structure was condemned. But what truly deterred them were accounts of apparitions in the corridors, unexplained flickering lights, and surgical instruments that would vanish only to reappear in improbable locations. By the 1990s, collapse was inevitable. The hospital was officially shut down following a cascade of allegations, including medical malpractice, suspicious deaths, and the alleged involvement of staff in occult practices. When its doors were sealed, the building was no longer perceived as a healthcare facility, but as a living mausoleum, a place that bore the weight of hundreds of truncated lives. Yet, the closure did not bring peace. On the contrary, its abandonment transformed the site into a magnet for the curious, thrill-seeking youths, and, according to witnesses, groups of occultists who found in the hospital the perfect setting for invocation rituals. One of the most disquieting accounts comes from an elderly resident who at the time worked as a night watchman nearby. He claims that on many a late night he heard voices chanting within the hospital, even when the building was already sealed and no one should have been inside. They weren't prayers, he recounts. They were harsh words, as if someone was summoning something that ought not to be summoned. The watchman never dared to approach, but he attests that the sound was accompanied by a reddish glow that emanated from beneath the doors. A former nurse who worked during its final years of operation recounted in a sworn statement, "There was a specific corridor I never traversed alone. I constantly felt as though someone was walking behind me, dragging their feet, even when I was certain I was by myself. I would pray softly, but it seemed the more I prayed, the closer the sound became." She requested her dismissal shortly before its definitive closure and swears she has never slept peacefully since. Historical records corroborate a series of inexplicable deaths that accumulated until the very end. Among them was a physician discovered deceased in the operating room, without any visible injury. His face contorted in an expression of pure terror, as if he had witnessed something utterly unbearable. Another account speaks of a child who simply vanished from her bed during the early hours of the morning. The mother, in despair, pleaded for answers, yet staff maintained the child had never been admitted there, despite records indicating otherwise. It was within this grim backdrop that the legend began to solidify. The hospital ceased to be merely a decaying edifice and transformed into an open wound upon the city. Families eschewed passing near it, motorists rerouted their journeys to avoid traversing the block, and even the police opted to disregard calls originating from the vicinity. No one dared to enter. Nevertheless, curiosity never waned. Youths would trespass onto the premises in search of thrills, only to emerge utterly terrified. Some recounted seeing shadows flitting through the corridors, others heard disembodied voices whispering their names. And there were those who swore they had discovered crude symbols etched into the walls, recently burnt candles, and bones strewn across the floor. To the town there remained no doubt. Even in abandonment, the hospital continued to be utilized, not for the preservation of life, but for something far more sinister. It was against this backdrop that three friends, Marcia, Cláudia, and Stella, resolved to investigate on their own volition. Driven by a confluence of curiosity and bravery, they were oblivious to the fact that they were on the precipice of reliving the agony and dread that had indelibly marked the site's history, and that, upon traversing those rusted doors, they would not merely be entering a derelict building, but plunging into an abyss where the past had never truly perished, and the present was condemned to echo its screams. Marcia, Cláudia, and Stella arrived at the entrance of the abandoned hospital shortly after sunset. The city, already engulfed by a weighty silence, seemed to wish to forewarn them that the path was anything but safe. The iron gate, weather-beaten and corroded by time, yielded with a metallic screech that reverberated like a dire forewarning. A frigid wind pierced through the building's broken windows, carrying with it the stench of mildew and rust. Each step toward the main entrance felt increasingly arduous, as if the air had grown dense, heavy, demanding a conscious effort to breathe. Nevertheless, they pressed on. Curiosity, courage, and perhaps an unnamed primal urge propelled them inward. Their initial encounter with the interior proved jarring. The floor of shattered tiles was blanketed in dust and dark stains reminiscent of dried blood. The walls, once pristine white, were now marred by extensive water damage and peculiar symbols etched in paint and soot. Stella aimed her flashlight at one, realizing it was not merely a scroll, but an incomplete circle bisected by claw-like marks. "This wasn't in any history book. It was done after the hospital closed," she murmured, her voice barely a whisper as if fearing unseen ears. The corridor stretched endlessly before them, illuminated only by the flickering beams of their flashlights. With each step, the reverberation of their boots seemed to conjure the phantom footsteps of others walking alongside them. Marcia, clutching a camera, resolved to document everything. The lens captured nuances imperceptible to the naked eye. Shadows that seemed to writhe autonomously, distorted reflections in the fractured glass, and even what resembled the fleeting silhouette of a child deep within the hallway. Yet, when she attempted to show her friends, the image vanished as if it had never existed. Cláudia was the first to discern the unnatural chill pervading the atmosphere. It wasn't merely the ambient temperature of a derelict building, but a biting cold that seemed to penetrate the skin and lodge itself deep within their bones. "I feel as if someone just walked past me," she whispered, scanning her surroundings for any logical explanation. No windows stood ajar. No creatures seemed to dwell there. Only the hospital, silently breathing. Upon traversing one of the wings, they discovered a partially dilapidated room. On the floor lay remnants of black candles burned down to their wicks. Small, scattered bones, likely animal remains, and circular soot stains indicative of makeshift fires. At the room's center stood what appeared to be a makeshift altar, an antique, rusted surgical table covered in peculiar markings. Symbols were scratched into the metal, symbols that resembled Latin words, yet distorted as if they had been adapted for something far more sinister. Stella, a language student, managed to decipher fragments of phrases that spoke of sacrifice and offering. As she translated in a hushed voice, her own breath seemed to falter, as if those words should never have been uttered. Suddenly, a sharp crack reverberated through the corridor. They all spun around simultaneously, but found nothing but impenetrable darkness. The sound, however, seemed to draw nearer, like shuffling footsteps on the tiled floor. Marcia raised her camera, and for a fleeting instant, captured a dark silhouette streaking across the corridor with impossible speed. None dared to move, until Cláudia, trembling, whispered, "I heard someone call my name." And in that very instant, all three heard it together. A low feminine whisper emanating from the gloom. "Cláudia." Panic seized them, yet instead of fleeing, a more potent force held them captive in that very spot. It was as if they were mesmerized by the hospital, as though the very atmosphere compelled them to remain. They proceeded to the old surgical block, where the sense of an unseen presence intensified. The faint scent of ether, an impossibility in a building abandoned for decades, permeated the air. Rust-encrusted surgical instruments still lay on a tray, appearing as though they had been used only moments before. And the most terrifying detail, a pristine, rust-free scalpel, gleamed under Marcia's flashlight beam, as if it had been placed there just moments ago. Stella began to convulse. Her eyes stared blankly into the void, and she began to murmur Latin words she had never studied. Marcia and Cláudia tried to restrain her, but felt her body temperature plummet disturbingly, as if she were being drained from within. When they finally managed to pull her from the room, silence once again descended, yet offered no solace. As they proceeded down another corridor, they heard a metallic clanging against the ceiling repeatedly, like heavy footsteps dragging chains. The sound reverberated and seemed to pursue them. Their flashlights flickered and died simultaneously, plunging them into absolute darkness for several terrifying seconds. When the light returned, fresh handprints marred the walls, long and slender, as if someone had clawed at the plaster just minutes prior. Upon entering the old pediatric ward, the remnants of rusted beds and broken toys lent the scene a nightmarish quality. A wooden rocking horse swayed autonomously in the corner of the room, creaking rhythmically, as if propelled by an unseen presence. It was then that they heard the whisper again, louder now and emanating from multiple directions. "Come back, come back, come back." The word reverberated, proliferated, until it seemed to originate from within their very beings. The hospital, in its dilapidated state, seemed to have awakened. Every wall thrummed with an inexplicable energy. Every shadow held a palpable weight. Every sound seemed meticulously calculated to unnerve. It was as if the place fed upon the burgeoning fear growing within the three women. Marcia continued recording, but with each subsequent review of the footage, something uncanny materialized on the screen. Glowing eyes in the background, shadowy figures observing, distorted faces that had been absent mere moments before. When they reached the end of the corridor, they realized they were no longer alone. The air grew perceptibly heavier, all ambient sounds abruptly ceased, and for a few seconds, a silence so profound it felt suffocating reigned. Then, a piercing shriek reverberated throughout the entire hospital, emanating from within the surgical ward, sending their hearts racing. There was no turning back. The hospital did not merely seek to frighten them. It sought to ensnare them, just as it had trapped all those who had never managed to escape. The shriek that tore through the hospital was so sharp and visceral it seemed beyond the capacity of a human throat. Marcia let the camera tremble in her hands, but did not stop recording. Her instinct clamored that something was about to unveil itself. Stella, still pallid and enervated, gazed into the void as if perceiving things her companions could not. Cláudia, overcome by abject terror, clutched her arm, pleading with them not to proceed. But it was too late. The hospital had sealed itself around them. Each corridor now seemed to shift like a living labyrinth, and the only viable direction was forward, towards the surgical ward. The corridor leading there stretched out in an unnatural manner. With every step, their flashlights flickered erratically, and denser shadows elongated across the floor and walls, coalescing into the silhouettes of contorted bodies. These shadows moved autonomously, projecting specters of people who were not there. Eyeless doctors, patients with sewn mouths, nurses clutching scalpels that dripped a dark liquid. The figures advanced and receded, as if the very fabric of reality were being incrementally torn asunder. When they finally reached the double doors of the ward, they found them ajar. The stench emanating from within was insufferable, a concoction of burnt flesh, ether, and fresh blood. As they pushed it open, a biting cold enveloped them, and the unfolding scene made Cláudia's knees give way. The center of the room was dominated by a surgical table, not merely covered in dust and rust, but now gleaming, clean, as if primed for immediate use. Upon it lay a body, partially shrouded by stained sheets. The most terrifying detail, the body still breathed. Its chest rose and fell erratically, accompanied by a gurgling sound. Marcia, overcome by the instinct to document, raised her camera. But when the image materialized on the viewfinder, it wasn't the body that appeared. It was herself, lying on the table, her chest splayed open and her face pallid, as if she had already undergone surgery. A shiver coursed down her spine. The body on the table stirred, and slowly its head turned towards the three women. Its face was obscured by gauze, but its eyes, jaundiced and webbed with black veins, gleamed in the darkness. Its mouth, stitched with thick thread, silently parted, tearing open the sutures and releasing a groan that seemed to reverberate from within the very walls. Stella began to scream, but it wasn't merely terror. It was as if she were reacting to a memory, as though she had witnessed that scene before in dreams or nightmares she had never confessed. The body raised one of its hands and pointed towards the ceiling. They followed the gesture and beheld something even more ghastly. Suspended from rusted hooks, Like meat in a slaughterhouse, dozens of bodies swayed faintly, some in an advanced state of decomposition, others with eyes still wide open, as if they had been abandoned there mere minutes ago. The slow movement produced a metallic creaking that filled the air like a macabre symphony. Suddenly, the ancient lamps on the ceiling flickered to life on their own, casting a sickly yellow pulsating light over the scene. The three women realized they were not alone. In every corner of the room, shadows coalesced and gained substance. They were faceless figures of doctors and nurses, clad in blood-stained scrubs, gripping surgical instruments as if poised to commence a procedure. The phantom sounds of respirators and heart monitors, obsolete for decades, permeated the atmosphere, creating the illusion that the hospital was reanimating solely to bear witness to their terror. Cláudia, seized by the primal urge to flee, attempted to rush towards the door, but it slammed shut with a resounding thud. One of the apparitions advanced towards her, and even without discernible eyes, she felt its piercing gaze fixed upon her. Her face, the being raised a scalpel and, without touching her, made a motion in the air. Instantly, a deep gash appeared on Cláudia's arm, gushing real blood. Her scream was muffled by the low guttural laughter that enveloped the room. Stella collapsed to her knees, hands clutching her head. Latin words spilled from her mouth once more, rapid and uncontrollable. Marcia noticed that the symbols on the walls began to glow in response, as if the hospital itself acknowledged the invocation. Suddenly, the body on the table rose fully, revealing its opened chest and still pulsating organs, yet devoid of a single drop of blood. Its face, now free of the gauze, was a grotesque amalgamation of human features. Dislocated eyes, a mouth impossibly wide, skin stitched together in varying hues. The creature spoke with a voice that didn't emanate from its mouth, but echoed within their minds. "You have trespassed where you should not have. Now you belong to this place." The impact of those words caused the walls to tremble. The ceiling began to crack, and from the concrete seeped a viscous black liquid that dripped onto the floor, forming puddles that shifted as if alive. Each drop seemed to whisper distinct words, names, dates, cries of agony. Marcia, still filming, glanced at the camera's display and witnessed a scene divergent from reality. She, Cláudia, and Stella, already prone on 3 surgical tables, with shadowy figures surrounding them, commencing a macabre surgery. She blinked, and the vision vanished, but the terror remained. Stella stood, her eyes entirely consumed by blackness, and in her voice echoed the creature's very words. "You do not comprehend. This hospital never truly closed. It persists on another stratum." At that instant, the floor quaked as if in an earthquake, and the swaying of the bodies suspended from the ceiling grew violent. Some detached from their hooks and fell with a dull thud, scattering fragments across the floor. The stench of decomposition intensified, and the surrounding figures advanced. Cláudia attempted to staunch the bleeding, but each time she applied pressure, another gash emerged, as if unseen scalpels were carving her skin from within. Marcia dropped the camera, which continued filming autonomously, as if possessing a will of its own. The lens slowly rotated until it framed the creature's face in the center of the room. The camera captured something the 3 could not discern with the naked eye. Dozens of human faces trapped within the monster's stitched flesh, opening and closing their mouths in silent screams. Among them were recognizable faces. Individuals who had vanished from the region, their photographs once emblazoning local newspapers. And in the corner of the lens, almost imperceptibly, Stella's own reflection was already emerging, as if she were being absorbed. The entire hospital seemed to pulse, as if it were a living organism. The sound of heartbeats reverberated through the walls, growing ever faster, stronger, until it intermingled with the heavy footsteps approaching from the corridors. Something even greater was drawing near. The creature on the table spread its arms, as if heralding the arrival of an even more dreadful entity. And then, at the zenith of horror, the hospital unveiled its truth. It was not merely an abandoned edifice, but a prison for souls that dared to defy its boundaries. A place where time was non-existent, where the living was slowly transmuted into parts of its structure, sewn into the walls, ensnared in the corridors, eternally feeding the cycle of pain and fear. The final scream that echoed was not Claudia's, nor Marcia's, nor Stella's. It was the collective shriek of all the souls trapped within that hospital, unleashed in a deafening chorus that made the three comprehend. There was no longer any escape. The hospital had not merely lured them in, it had chosen them. The silence that enveloped the hospital, after the deafening chorus, was not one of reprieve, but of condemnation. There was no solace within those walls, only the certainty that every breath was observed, every heartbeat meticulously recorded, and every step taken became part of an irreversible spiral. Marcia, Claudia, and Stella were ensnared, not merely physically, but mentally. Their minds could no longer discern between reality and the manifestations of the entity that governed that place. The hospital was not simply a ruin, it was a consciousness, a living organism that fed upon the fear, the pain, and the belief of those who dared to enter. Claudia trembled, clutching her lacerated arm, yet the most terrifying realization was that the pain was no longer her own. It was as if the wound pulsed with an independent heart, beating out of sync with her body. The blood that seeped across the floor did not spread as it ought to. Instead, it flowed towards the cracks, vanishing into the fissures as if the very edifice itself were imbibing every last drop. She wept, but as she gazed at the walls, she realized that tears also streamed down the distorted visages, coalescing from the mold and dark blotches. It was impossible not to feel her own agony proliferating, reverberating through every crevice of the edifice. Marcia, for her part, could no longer tear her eyes from the camera lying on the floor. The device quivered autonomously, as if breathing, and continued to film. The image on the screen, however, no longer corresponded to the reality of the room. There were no suspended bodies, no spectral forms wielding scalpels. Instead, there was a premonition of the future. Marcia saw herself, days later, walking through the streets of the small Minas town, with a haggard gaze and a body marked by indelible scars she did not yet possess. Behind her, at every corner, the hospital's silhouette loomed, rising like a constant shadow, an inextricable extension of her. It was as if she were perpetually tethered to that place, even beyond its walls. The hospital would not relinquish her. Stella, on the other hand, seemed to be the one yielding most profoundly. Her utterly black eyes reflected not merely bottomless voids, but also figures moving within them. Small, grotesque forms, like individuals desperately striving to break free from her consciousness. Her mouth murmured words in Latin, but now with chilling lucidity, as if she had finally become the optimal vessel for what the hospital required. Her friends' terror intensified as they discerned between the utterances familiar names. Claudia's name, Marcia's name, the names of other townspeople. Stella was pronouncing the next victims, as if each syllable were an irrevocable decree. The psychic toll began to mount with the unsettling awareness that none of this would be circumscribed to that space. The hospital had chosen its unwitting conduits, and now the entire city would perceive its malevolent influence more acutely. That same night, nearby residents would attest to having heard prolonged shrieks emanating from the building, and for the first time, the region's power grid faltered for a few seconds, enveloping everything in an absolute gloom. The people, startled in their homes, could not explain it, but upon looking out their windows, they would see the hospital's silhouette illuminated from within, as if bustling with unseen activity, decades after having been long since derelict. For Marcia, Claudia, and Stella, there was no egress. Even when they attempted to find a door, a corridor, any sign of escape, everything transformed into more corridors, more portentous symbols, more rooms replete with surgical instruments that gleamed as if impatient for use. Every time Cláudia thought of a safe place, such as the town's main street or her mother's home, the hospital tormented her, projecting those images before her but distorted. Burning houses, familiar faces screaming in pain, streets covered in blood. No solace was possible. The most unsettling realization was that their sanity was being whittled away piece by piece. The hospital didn't need to kill them physically to destroy them. It wanted them to carry its presence forever, contaminating everything around them. And that's what happened. Days later, when some curious locals decided to investigate the site after hearing reports of strange lights, they found the hospital intact, exactly as it had always been. Dust, rust, silence. But on the main wall of the reception area, there was something new. 3 imprinted shadows, like burn marks in different positions. One of them seemed to be holding a camera. Another, with an arm outstretched, showed signs of deep cuts. And the third was on its knees, head bowed, mouth open in a silent scream. None of the bodies were found, but everyone in the town knew to whom those figures belonged. Since then, the psychological impact of that hospital transcended the confines of the ruin. Children began to dream of it without ever having approached it. Residents heard footsteps behind them, even in broad daylight. Pets, when passing near the road, would freeze, growling at the emptiness. The entire town was gripped by a collective paranoia, and the feeling of being watched became routine. Many swore that upon closing their eyes they could smell ether and burnt flesh, the same scent that emanated from the hospital rooms. The most harrowing part, however, concerned Stella. Her name began to be whispered on the quietest nights. People reported hearing her voice within their own homes, reciting Latin phrases they didn't comprehend. Others claimed to see her in mirror reflections or window panes, always with black eyes and her lips moving, even without emitting a sound. Her presence spread like a plague, and many believed that Stella had not merely succumbed to the hospital. She had become a part of it, the nexus between the town and that entity. Marcia, on the other hand, was never forgotten. Her camera was found in an alleyway near the road, as if it had been left there by the tape inside it contained over 8 hours of recordings. But the most disturbing aspect was that, even when turned off, it continued to register images. Those who watched swore they saw not only the 3 friends, but also themselves, lying on operating tables, awaiting the scalpel. Many could not endure the experience and destroyed the device, yet no one could erase the indelible sensation that the hospital now permeated everywhere, within homes, within dreams, within their very minds. The psychological impact that proliferated was not akin to a campfire tale, but rather a collective malediction. The derelict hospital transcended the status of a mere forgotten structure. It became a spectre, breathing in concert with the city. And each time the full moon illuminated its walls, the residents knew that new victims would be summoned within. For the hospital never merely craved the souls that entered its rooms. It desired witnesses. It desired echoes. It desired to be remembered. And now, there was no longer any escaping its memory. The narrative did not conclude that night, nor with the vanishing of Marcia, Cláudia, and Stella. The derelict hospital persisted there, inert in its decay, yet resonating at an unseen frequency, almost as if it pulsed in tandem with the city's heart. What was once merely a forgotten ruin transmuted into a focal point of dread, and the reverberation of terror slowly began to erode the collective sanity of the inhabitants. The initial manifestations were subtle. Children dreamt of frigid corridors, recounting details they could never have known. Some awoke with marks on their arms, resembling scratches, and wept as they swore someone had attempted to restrain them in their sleep. Domestic animals fled their homes, returning days later caked in dust and with a vacant stare, as if they had traversed another reality. There were also accounts of disembodied voices, whispers emanating from nowhere, echoing the names of individuals who were, subsequently, observed loitering near the hospital, drawn there by an inexplicable compulsion. Marcia's camera, discovered by the roadside, became the subject of an inquiry. A few intrepid individuals ventured to view the recordings and affirmed that the images defied the laws of physics. Time itself appeared to distort. In certain segments, the video depicted the hospital in full operation, physicians traversing the corridors, patients groaning on gurneys. In others, it unveiled impossible scenes, such as current town residents wandering among the rubble, gazing directly into the lens, despite never having been there. One particular detail left everyone in a state of profound shock. On every tape, a figure invariably lurked in the corner of the frame, with black eyes and a grotesque, contorted smile, watching. Many believed it to be Stella. As the months wore on, the terror reverberated into tangible tragedies. Young thrill-seekers began to infiltrate the hospital in search of adrenaline, yet few returned without lingering consequences. Some were driven to madness, muttering incoherent Latin phrases. Others simply vanished, only to be found days later, wandering the streets of the neighboring town, bereft of memory and bearing symbol-shaped scars across their bodies. The hospital seemed to expand its malevolent influence, spreading its insidious marks like a virulent contagion. The eldest residents, gripped by terror, began to unearth forgotten histories. Tales emerged of the land having been used for rituals during the 19th century, even before the hospital's construction. Whispers circulated that the very walls erected were not merely composed of cement, but also of bones and sacrifices interred within the foundations. The hospital, it was claimed, was born accursed, and its closure was never a mere administrative act. It was a failed exorcism. And now, with each passing generation, the oppressive weight of that curse only intensified. The town found itself living under a perpetual state of vigilance. No one dared traverse the road adjacent to the hospital after sundown. Homes began to be erected at a greater remove, as if the urban sprawl itself recoiled from that accursed locus. Nevertheless, its insidious influence persisted. Unexplained power outages, the blare of antiquated sirens in the dead of night, echoes of screams reverberating through the hills. The hospital was an omnipresent specter, a constant reminder to all that there was no escape. Then, as if to mock the collective dread, the most disquieting phenomena began. The building was sited in disparate locations. People reported glimpsing its facade through the mist, even miles away. Certain windows reflected not the surrounding landscape, but rather its corridors, illuminated by lanterns no longer held by any living hand. The hospital had transcended its physical confines. It was now a pervasive presence, a parasite infiltrating minds and dreams. The most terrifying revelation, however, was the rumor that began to circulate amongst the residents, that Marcia, Cláudia, and Stella had never truly perished. Some claimed to have seen them, walking the streets in the dead of night, motionless, with vacant eyes like specters eternally denied repose. Others swore that their voices could be heard when phone in calls from unidentified numbers, always repeating the same phrase: "The hospital isn't gone, it's within you." This haunting echo, this pervasive reverberation, rendered it impossible for the city to move forward. Every street, every corner, every shadow bore the weight of a place that should have been forgotten, yet had become an intrinsic part of everyone's identity. The hospital was no longer merely a haunted edifice. It was a grim reminder that some curses do not remain confined to their walls. They spread, multiply, and perpetuate themselves until every resident is, in some way, either a patient or a witness to that which should never have been seen. And as the full moon continues to illuminate those crumbling walls, the hospital breathes. For even in ruins it remains alive. And every curious gaze, every daring step, every fearful gasp serves as fuel for the eternity of its reign. The terror has not ended. It has merely found new ways to reverberate. If you've made it this far, tell me, would you dare traverse the corridors of a hospital that breathes as if it were a living organism? Can you imagine hearing your name echoing in a place where no one should exist? Now consider, what if this hospital were in your city, as close to your home as it is to the lives of these residents of Minas. How many steps would you take before realizing there's no turning back? The case you've just learned about is not merely a story. It's a warning. Many believe that abandoned structures harbor more than just dust and silence. They accumulate suffering, pain, and presences that never accepted their departure. The Minas Hospital is but one among dozens of places concealing similar secrets. I want you to tell me in the comments, do you believe this hospital is still active, even though it's closed? Have you ever entered an abandoned place and felt the atmosphere shift as if an unseen entity were observing your every move? Share this story with someone who would dare investigate this place alongside you, or who would never set foot there. And prepare yourself, because in the next video, we will descend even deeper into the very bowels of fear. They say the abandoned hospital in Minas isn't truly empty. It merely chooses when to reveal itself. Sometimes it's a fleeting shadow on the road. Other times, a voice calling your name in the dead of night. But what many report is most unsettling. Upon closing their eyes, no matter their whereabouts, they invariably perceive that dark, boundless corridor awaiting them. For the hospital does not belong to the city. It belongs to those who truly comprehend its essence. And now, it, too, belongs to you. After all, some places require no physical ingress to ensure you can never truly depart. Thanks for making it through this dark night with us at the Dread Portal. Now I have to ask, do you have what it takes to survive this? Let me know in the comments if you can even get to sleep tonight. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that bell for more terrifying tales each week. Sleep tight if you dare. Until the next story, good night, and see you in the next video from the Dread Portal.